All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us for the ARC of Fort Bend County Parent Education and Support Group meeting on Zoom today. I'm Carrie Axtell, the Youth and Education Advocacy Program Director here at the ARC of Fort Bend County. A little bit about us. We're a nonprofit organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, such as autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and more. Our mission is to ensure opportunities for people with IDD and their families to maximize their quality of life within our community. We do that through advocacy for and with people with IDD, through community outreach and providing information about IDD and the community services and resources that are available to families. We provide trainings, resource fairs, parent support groups such as this one. We hold a variety of excellent social and recreational programs, such as a monthly Teen Tween Social and Parent Night Out, which is a respite event, 20-something social group, adult social recreation club, Special Olympics for adults, and much, much more. So if you have any questions about the ARC of Fort Bend County and what we do, I encourage you to visit our website at arcoffortbend.org and like our Facebook page, which we update regularly with community events and information. And you can also reach out to me, and I've actually put our contact information, my email address, in the chat box there. So with all of that said, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. You're in for a treat. There are some exceptional professionals here in the community who share their knowledge and expertise with us on the second Thursday of each month throughout the school year at 11 a.m. And this month, we're very proud to welcome Dr. Amelisa Johnson with Johnson Psychological Services, presenting back to school tips for students with IDD. But before I continue introducing our speaker, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. When you logged on, your volume should have been on mute. If not, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself and remain muted throughout the presentation, that will help us cut down on background noise and we can hear the speaker more clearly and have good sound quality, as we will record this presentation for sharing on our Facebook page and YouTube channel later on. If you have a question during the presentation, please post it in the chat box. The chat box button should be located near the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it right offhand, there might be an ellipse or 3 dots there at the bottom of your screen. If you press on that for more, that might show you your chat box option. But I will compile those questions throughout the presentation for our speaker to answer at the end. Questions and comments are always welcome because we usually learn quite a bit through questions. So thank you for sharing those. You may know that this group has both an educational or presentation component as well as a network support group function. In this virtual meeting format, we're going to hold the presentation portion of the meeting first at 11 a.m. And then at noon, after we have stopped the presentation after questions, I'll stop the recording. And if there's anybody who remains, wants to visit, share challenges or successes, bounce questions or ideas off of each other, you're encouraged to stick around for the parent support group portion of it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at that time as well. As always, if you have questions or want to discuss things offline with me or one-on-one, I encourage you shooting me an email at kaxtell@arcoffortbend.org, and that information is in the chat box. So without further ado, we are pleased to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Amelisa Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a graduate of Kempner High School in Sugar Land, where she went on to receive her Bachelor of Arts from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas in 2001. She earned her PhD in clinical psychology from Texas Tech University in 2006, and her postdoctoral work was at Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District, Department of Psychological Services. Dr. Johnson worked as a staff psychologist for Cy-Fair until 2008, where she was responsible for the assessment and delivery of counseling services for 5 different campuses, 1 high school, a middle school, and 3 elementary schools. I bet that was fun.
Wow.
Yeah. In 2008, she and her family relocated to Abilene, Texas, where she started her private practice focused on the assessment and treatment of clinical disorders in children and teenagers, including autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, reactive attachment disorder, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and depression. Dr. Johnson worked for 4 years in Abilene as a clinical director at the Ministry of Counseling and Enrichment. There, she quickly developed a niche for the assessment and treatment of children, teenagers, and young adults with ASD. In 2012, Dr. Johnson relocated with her family to her husband's childhood home near Rochester, Minnesota. And she started her own private practice there, where she quickly gained recognition for her expertise. Her referral sources included several departments from the world-renowned Mayo Clinic, as well as all local school districts and other private practitioners. In June 2019, Dr. Johnson and her family moved back here to Sugar Land, where her private practice is now located at Sugar Bend Center. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Annalisa Johnson.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Carrie, for that, taking the time to do that. I do have one disclaimer that I will begin with that I need to share. It is an honor to be here first off, but I do want you to know that all the information that's provided in my presentation today is intended for informational purposes only and is not meant as clinical advice to diagnose or provide treatment. Should you or anyone you know need immediate assistance, though, you should call 911 in the US, or you can call the crisis hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. You can even text the word HOME, HOME, to 741-741. If your needs are not emergent, though, and you're looking for a trusted professional, I'm happy to provide referrals, or I can recommend that you check out a platform known as Psychology Today, where you can put in your zip code and qualified professionals and their information is provided. I just want you to know that I'm very honored to be here. I'm excited to be here. My other disclaimer is that I am not a perfect parent. I am a parent, but I'm certainly not a perfect parent. I make many mistakes, and often I don't even take my own advice. So please know that I come from a place of empathy and care, and oftentimes I feel like maybe you guys should be the ones that are up here giving the tips, because you're the ones that are in the trenches with children who have disabilities. And so I very much am grateful that you gave me a chance to be here today and to talk about how to prepare our kids for back to school. Some of our kids are already in school, so I appreciate you even taking the time to look at this at this point and being open to what we're going to talk about. So yeah, I have in there back to school tips for students with IDD in 2020. 2020 has certainly given us a run for our money, and so that's the key for this talk today. So let's just go ahead and get started. This first slide, I just wanted to start with one of my favorite idioms that I actually only learned about in my adult years after living in Minnesota on a hog farm. So I actually lived on a hog farm in Minnesota. That's what took me there, was my husband's family farm. And so after living on the farm, I learned that plans are often changing, that pretty much you can't make plans because there are things that are always changing. And so my apple cart was often upset because I like to know what's going to happen and I need plans. And so my mother-in-law would tell me these things about, oh, your apple cart is upset, or apple cart upset. And so in this cartoon, it depicts a little bit of that. It says, oh, weeping wagons, who's upset the apple cart? The answer to that, obviously, for us is COVID. So what does that even mean, upset the apple cart? It means causing trouble or spoiling people's plans. So we use that when we're talking about that. And COVID has certainly caused us a lot of trouble. This pandemic has spoiled all of our plans. COVID has, like it says, he always upsets the apple cart, which is the reason we cannot work together as a team. So COVID has made it very difficult for us to do many things because it has caused us trouble and spoiled our plans, spoiled our own personal plans for our work, our home, for our children, for our school. It really is the culprit here. And so I just felt like it was important to take some time to recognize that COVID is in fact really, really very, he's the culprit, and he's the reason why we're feeling right now. And so what's the opposite of upset apple cart? These cute little pigeons have an answer for us. It says to aid, to face, to meet, help, calm, comfort, quiet, soothe, and enlighten. And that's why we're here today. So our apple carts are upset, our plans have been spoiled, but as helpers to our children, to our families, it's our job to recognize that, to face it, and to calm and comfort, quiet, soothe, and then hopefully in the end, after it's all said and done, and I do have hope it will be all said and done, we will be enlightened and more resilient. I've heard many people say that this pandemic is going to be for our children what makes them resilient. It's going to be their thing, you know, that really helps them to grow and to learn that they can do hard things. And so yeah, so I just I'm like I said, I'm very hopeful that we will gain something from this upset apple cart. So one of my dearest friends is I could say a world-renowned psychologist. Her name is Dr. Emily King, and she often quotes Michael John Carley to help us understand that the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. Now, oftentimes we think that when we're feeling anxious, the thing to do is to just calm down, just calm down. Now, that's actually not very helpful if you've ever tried to tell somebody that when they were anxious. Actually, Michael John Carley was quoted by, his name is Barry Prezance, in his book called Uniquely Human, and I highly recommend this book. But what he's saying here is the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. And a lot of times when we don't know what's going to happen, we naturally are going to feel anxious. We are feeling a lot of anxiety because we don't know what's going to happen. And it's hard to trust what is going to happen. It's also hard to trust the people that we're used to trusting, whether it be our leaders, our community helpers. Nobody really knows what's happening and what's going to happen. This is first for so many people, so it's really difficult to have trust. And that's why we feel so anxious, because we're not trusting many of the outcomes we're facing. So yes, we're feeling very anxious, and a lot of that has to do with, it all goes back to our earliest ancestors whose life depended on knowing what was to come. If we didn't know what was going to come, we could get eaten. Our earliest ancestors and their hunter-gatherer stage, if they didn't know the land, the terrain, they didn't know what was lurking in that area over there. It could be a hungry tiger or an angry alligator or an unfriendly tribe. They had to know what was going to happen, so or else they weren't going to survive. So our brain is wired this way. It's wired this way to always, not always, but to oftentimes be looking for things like danger. And when we don't know what's going to happen, then we feel very anxious. And so that's where all this anxiety is coming from. But do we have the skills as parents, as individuals, to handle what is coming our way? We absolutely do. And so that's where the trust comes in, that we have to recognize that, yes, we're actually supposed to feel anxious right now, but we do have the skills to handle what is coming our way. And so a big piece of that trust comes from within ourselves. We have to trust ourselves to know that we have done hard things in the past, and we can continue to do these things in the future. Even if we're unsure of the outcome, we certainly can learn to trust ourselves and remember that other hard time that I went through. That time I didn't know what I was going to do. I used my skills that I had to come up with an outcome. And when we are feeling as grown-ups, trusting in ourselves to have the skills that we need, then we are able to download that trust and that calm onto our children. And so that's why a big part of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with you. And so as parents, it's important for us to recognize that there's only so much that we can control. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Big Life Journal. Was created by Alexandra Edens and her husband. And they took a lot of the growth mindset research and made it very child friendly. And they have a lot of really wonderful graphics for growth mindset, but also recognizing what is in your circle of control and what is not in your circle of control. And so a big part of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with us as parents establishing that trust within ourselves and recognizing how to regulate and manage ourselves. And so the first step in doing that, especially when we're dealing with anxiety, is recognizing that there are certain things we can control and there are certain things we have absolutely no control over. And those things that we don't have control over, a lot of times we spend too much energy towards. And so then we're not really getting far. So I really like this graphic here because they do a really good job of identifying for us as parents, what are some things that I actually can control right now? There actually are some things we have control over, even though in the middle of this pandemic, we might feel like we just have lost all control. So I'm just going to go through a few of these things, starting at the top left. It says, choosing a learning arrangement that works for all family members. You certainly have control over it. Choosing nourishing, healthy foods, staying hydrated, and getting some sleep. Those are things we can control. We can put our energy towards that. Involving our children in creating a fun learning space at home. So if your children are having to learn virtually, we can control, help asking our kids how to create that learning space. This is my favorite, information I choose to receive. In my practice, I talk a lot with parents of children with special needs about how it's really important to turn off some of the media at times and some of the information that we're receiving. There's so much information coming at us at all times, but especially now, you can choose to not be on social media. You certainly can choose which news avenue or news outlet you're going to get your information from. So these are things you can control. If you're noticing that you're more anxious after you've watched the news, you actually can control turning that off and making some changes there. You can control teaching your children how to be precautious, teaching them about COVID and how it's important to wash our hands and wear our masks. Like, these are things when you send your children out in the world, let's say you have to send them to face-to-face school, or you're having to be in an environment where you have to be around other people. Teaching our children what is good to be precautious and those skills is something we can control. Another one of my favorites is what I do with my free time. We might not get much free time, but we can choose when we get that 5 minutes or when we get that 10 minutes, instead of going to our phone and just kind of browsing social media or articles, we maybe can choose to do something different. So we can certainly choose what we do with our free time. Taking precautions for yourself, finding creative ways to see friends and family. So these are all things that we have control over. Joining community groups and learning pods, similar to what you've done here today. So these are things that are going to help you kind of focus your energy towards ideas that you can actually be in charge of and make a difference in. And at the bottom, it says these are the things that you can let go of. Because you have actually no control over these things, so you can let them go. For example, decisions that your school district might be making, whether or not you have to work from home, whether or not one of your favorite restaurants is closed. If another quarantine wave hits, not being able to see friends or family, how much free time you have. Like, these are things you can't control. And so a lot of times we spend extra energy trying to manage the area of let it go instead of the area of what I actually can do something about. And so going back to, again, that trust factor and knowing these are the things I can manage, that's going to instill more trust in yourself. So spending some time really looking at those things is a way for us as parents to start feeling more trusting in what we're doing. So we're going to keep on the topic of taking care of ourselves. I said put your oxygen mask on first because I will never forget the first time that I was traveling and I heard them say this. If you're traveling with small children, put your oxygen mask on first. And I was like, wait, what? I'm a nurturer. I take care of other people. I'm a helper. Like, I have to take care of other people first before I can take care of myself. That's just my wiring. And then, of course, once I heard why, it was like, if I'm dead on the floor, I can't help anybody. So this is just really important. And I want, you might be rolling your eyes right now because this is like, well, of course, if I could take care of myself, I would be taking care of myself. If I had more time, I could take care of myself. If, I didn't have several children with different needs and multiple grades, absolutely, I would take care of myself. But I'm just wanting you to try to hang in there with me on this one because it's actually one of the most important things that we actually have control over that we can do for children. And so I heard a wonderful quote this morning. That it was actually in an article that was written by a psychiatrist in Washington who's written for therapists. And they closed the article with, as helpers, we need to stop trying to set ourselves on fire to keep other people warm. And that really resonated with me because I do try to stretch myself as thin as I can to be helpful to other people. And so that's just natural. But I have seen over and over and over in my life how that actually isn't very helpful to anyone in the long run. And so it is important that we are trying to put our oxygen mask on first. And so I'm not sure if you have read Deborah Reaver's book, Differently Wired, but if you haven't, it's a wonderful read for children of parents, for parents of children with special needs. And so I highly recommend this book. So she talks a lot about self-care as actually not being optional. We might have a lot of reasons why we feel like taking care of ourselves isn't really important or isn't really a priority and really shouldn't be a priority. But if we're talking about anxiety and we're trying to download calm to our children and we're trying to download trust to our children, if we're not regulated emotionally, we won't be able to give them any of those skills that we're going to be talking about for the second half of this talk. So self-care really isn't optional. It's something that we have to really, really consider and look at. And I don't know about you, but when I hear the word self-care, I think of like spa day. For me personally, like girls trip, big things like even just an hour and a half massage, a mani-pedi, like things that are going to take significant amount of time. I mean, because that's really what I desire. Vacation, these are things that when I think of self-care come to mind right away. But in her book, Deborah writes about how self-care really just has to be two things: intentional and just for you. And so she talks about how she kind of surveyed parents of children with special needs and how they've kind of come up with ways to do this very intentional and very much just for you. And these are just some examples of what she calls, finding daily pockets of joy and contentment. So again, as parents of children with special needs, we might not be able to have the vacation that's going to give us that reset that we need. But these are some very practical things that, just some examples of things that people have done. And one of them, I'm just going to go through the list really quickly. You know, listening to a podcast, getting enough sleep. I have a patient that I work with who she just decided she was going to try to work on getting 8 hours of sleep a night, and that was an entire game changer for her and her regulation. Writing in a journal, praying, closing the office door for 10 minutes and meditating, or even just closing the office door, period. Turning the phone off an hour before bedtime, practicing yoga. I will never be a yogi, but I certainly have learned to practice some yoga poses in my office when I get breaks in between patients, just doing some of those stretches. So I think that's why it's like practicing yoga, maybe not doing an hour yoga class, but just doing a few stretches. Gardening, drinking good coffee. I'll never forget when I decided that, you know what, I probably don't need to just be buying Folgers in bulk anymore. Like, I can probably invest in some very good coffee these days, meaning coffee that I really enjoy the taste of, and it's not just like I just need to get my caffeine. So when I made that decision that I was going to actually invest in some very good coffee and ground my own beans and use a French press, you know, these things actually they were intentional. It was something I did intentionally to take care of myself, and it was just for me. Now, sometimes I share my nice coffee with my family, but mostly it's just for me, and I keep it in my office, and so then it makes it even more of a just for me kind of thing. And so even if it's not something like that, even just deciding, you know what, I'm going to sit and enjoy this cup of coffee for 5 minutes without interruption. That's something that's intentional. You're identifying this is my self-care, and it's something just for me. So that's just a small example. Playing the ukulele, doing needlepoint, getting the closet or room organized. These are just some ideas that you might not think were self-care, but that you maybe just decided, okay, I'm going to, maybe you just decide that, okay, I'm going to experiment with every day. I'm going to take this amount of time to do this one thing just for myself, and just see what that does for you. Again, we're looking not for anything big or major, but just daily pockets of that you've identified for yourself as being intentional to take care of yourself. And so I just recommend that you try it. And if it doesn't work, then yes, go back to the way you were doing things. But it might actually surprise you. So self-care, again, is very important for us as parents in order to be able to do what we have to do every single day. And so this is just another graphic from a Big Life Journal that identifies some very important things that I use in my practice, but also just anybody can do. It's calming strategies for adults. Again, we're talking about ourselves first because it's our job as our parent, as helpers, to try to remember to regulate ourselves as best as we can, so that when we're feeling anxious, we can get in a space that is better to help our child. There is a phrase that says anxiety is contagious, but calm is also contagious. So, so again, if you can learn to regulate yourself in those moments of anxiety or dysregulation or unknown, then that is going to go really far for you in helping your child. So I'll just go again through a few of these. It says at the very top, it says focus on the senses. This is actually a grounding technique that's been documented in the research of mindfulness to be very helpful. When we're dealing with anxiety, oftentimes what we're doing is we're what's called catastrophizing the future. So we're either thinking forward about things that could happen, usually worst case scenario. It's usually not, oh, I wonder if that awesome thing will happen. It's usually like, what if dot, 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 and then a negative outcome, right? So we're usually catastrophizing the future, or we're bemoaning the past. We're thinking about something in the past that we wish we had not done, or that we wish never happened. And so what that does is it takes us away in our minds, and it takes us away from the moment of what's happening in front of us. And so when we can ground ourselves to where we're at, then it helps us to kind of let some of those other things go. And focusing on the senses is an easy practice that I teach kids to do all the time. And it's just called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And basically you just stop what you're doing. And you actually don't even have to stop. It could be just when you're sitting at the dinner table, you just take note. You just name in your mind 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This is something that you can do when you're driving, when you're going for a walk, to just practice mindfulness, being in the moment, noticing what's actually going on around. The other thing that is right next to that is move. So again, when we are feeling anxious, naturally we start to feel our bodies start to, sometimes our bodies will start to gain energy, start to feel this, our heart pounding, or maybe our hands getting sweaty. And what that's about is what's called the stress response. So our brain at this point is feeling threatened, that there's danger lurking around, and or that there's something bad that might happen. And so it starts to get your body prepared for what's called fight or flight. So you're either about to, run away from this stressor. This is what you would like to do. You're either going to fight it or you're going to freeze. And so when we're feeling anxious, that's what's happening in our body. Our brain is getting us ready and prepared for danger, to survive. And so a lot of times we get this energy inside of us that we don't really have a place to run, or we don't have a place, anything to really fight. And so this energy just gets backed up inside of us. And we start to feel dizzy or confused or exhausted. And so the really important thing that we can do is move. Because when that energy is getting inside of you, you don't really have a place to put it. It's just going to get backed up. And so you need to kind of it could be as simple as standing up and walking to the bathroom or to the kitchen. And so move, it says take a walk, do a few yoga poses. Stretching is a game changer. It helps to release that energy that's building up inside of you, and why you're not feeling relaxed. If you need to run in place, or it says jump on a trampoline. So movement is medicine. And so that's really another thing that as adults, we can try to work on for ourselves. Just a couple more I'm going to highlight is connecting to nature. There's a lot of fabulous research out there, especially right now, about how being connected to nature through greenscapes or bluescapes, green parks and trees, or ocean, even just pictures of these things in your working space can be helpful in improving attention and focus, and also in your regulation. So some ideas here: going outside and walking barefoot on the grass. Maybe you decide that is what is going to be part of your self-care routine. Maybe you're just going to take a walk in the grass every morning from now on. This other one says sit outside in a relaxed lotus position, and then deeply breathe. Again, practicing some of that yoga might actually be helpful. The only other thing that I wanted to highlight here is controlling the environment to calm the senses. So these are just some great examples of things that when there's a lot going on, there's a lot of unknown, our senses can get overwhelmed. Our senses are how we bring in information from the world. And so if there's too much bright light, or there's lots of noise going on, or you need some soothing experience, like smells or sounds. Some of us need a deep touch. We know this in our children, that some of them are sensory seekers, some of them are avoiders. I'm not sure if you know what you are. And so I know for me, I didn't realize that I was more defensive to certain sensory things until I learned that my son had that sensory issue. And so, wrapping yourself like a burrito in a weighted blanket, these are things that will help calm your senses, so that you can get back in there and do what you do best, just parenting your child through. And so, so thinking about your senses and how we can calm ourselves through our senses is really, really important to work through. So again, this can be found. A copy of it. There's a link. So we will spend some time, talking about how important and why it's important as parents for us to kind of think through and experiment with some of the ways that we need to calm ourselves and center ourselves so that we can download that calm or that trust onto our children. So now we're going to switch gears to some of the other things that we can be doing specifically for our children. So I have here, it says the more needs, the more structure. So the more needs that your child has, the more structure is going to be helpful for them. So I have a list here of some things, and I'm going to go through the list. And these are more practical strategies for you in dealing with the anxiety that your child might be having about school days, about virtual learning, about just some of the things that they're having to face right now, all the newness that they're having to face and that we're all having to face. So just to begin, the first one, it says visual schedules. So you probably are very familiar with what a visual schedule is. But basically, and you can certainly get on Pinterest and look at all kinds of visual schedules that parents have tried to create for their family. The thing I want to highlight is a visual schedule is helpful because children, they need to see what is happening, but also that there's an ending time to something that might be undesirable. So that's why visual schedules are helpful, because it helps them to know what's going to come next, but also is kind of reassuring to know that if they have to stop doing something that they want to do, that might come again later in the day, or if they're doing something that they don't really want to do at all, that this is going to end and something new will begin. So I recommend visual schedules for a morning routine, morning checklist for the school day, but then for after school day as well. For me and my family, I got it all figured out that we were going to have, this is what was happening in the morning, and I just needed to make sure he understood what the day was going to be like. But I kind of forgot about, well, what about after school? And then that's when we ran into some trouble, because after that, my son is doing virtual learning. So as soon as the end was done, he was like gone. He needed to go. And so he went to outside and he went to his friend's house. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, we need to do our regular after school activities like piano or homework or things like that. But so we didn't really kind of figure out the after school day. And that caused a lot of emotional angst, because if you are a virtual learner, there hasn't really been a hard and fast end to the summer and start of the school. And then it just kind of popped up on us all of a sudden that we were making this hard shift to, well, you can be on screens with very little maybe routine all day long. But then after school, then school started, and then we had after school, and we just didn't really think through all those things. So I'm putting this up here for you to just be aware that you might have the school day figured out by now, or you might have the morning routine figured out. But I think children, especially who suffer with anxiety or might be having a lot of anxiety, the more you can give them about what their day is going to look like, the more calm that they will have. And it might look very different on different days. I have a niece who's in first grade, and she has several people having to help manage her virtual learning, and she had to have this is what's happening tomorrow. Every day was different for her, and so she needed to have a different visual schedule for different days, and that was something that was reviewed every day, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So visual schedules don't necessarily have to be your pictures. If that's helpful, by all means do that. But they can just be as simple as making a list, a checklist, or as simple as having just blocks of time where you have sticky notes on each block of time that can demonstrate what they're doing from that time. So they just need to know what's going on, and it needs to be posted. So the second thing I have up here is learning space that they can leave when they're done. So I'm talking about children who might be learning online and virtually right now, or even if you have a learner that's going somewhere for school and they have to come home and do homework, the learning space that they can go into and leave can be very helpful in switching the learning environment. So I highly recommend. I know it's not always easy when you have multiple children and you have limited space at home, but that's definitely just a recommendation. If they can have a space that they can know as just the learning space. Unfortunately, with my teenagers that I'm working with, their main learning space is their bedroom, and because of that, they're having to stay in their bedroom all day long, and then they're having to stay all evening long to do homework as well. So in those situations, there certainly are different things that we could be doing to be helping them have some time to leave that space and then come back. So the next one says morning check-ins and evening debriefing. I think that that's really important to do. And by morning check-in is kind of like a morning meeting. They do this in school often. They talk about, what their plans are for the day, but then also putting out there like a positive affirmation for each student or for each child, and also maybe even just noting something that they're really grateful for. So you're starting your morning with something positive, but then also what the day will hold, and if they have anything that they need to talk about that happened the night before. So just checking in with your kids in the morning, and it doesn't need to be too elaborate. You don't need to be sitting around, at a formal meeting, in a conference table or anything like that. It could just be when you go in your kid's room, in the morning to get them up, that you're just kind of checking in with them and talking with them about what the day is going to look like. But also just starting with some very positive affirmations or some of the things that you're grateful for. And maybe that they're grateful for, because whenever we can start our day with a positive, affirmation, there's research to show that that actually sets the tone for the day. And then I'm recommending at this point evening debriefings as well. So evening time, maybe it's dinner time, maybe it's after everyone's getting settled, maybe it's at bedtime, but an evening debrief can be very helpful. Of how do you think the day went today? What do you think? And most of the time it's helpful because you're not necessarily in the moment of like what went wrong. You're kind of problem solving in that moment. You're doing it much later. And so the evening debrief is very, very helpful when something hasn't gone really well, and then you can talk about it when everybody's kind of like calm and fed, and then you can talk about again what tomorrow might look like. So an evening debrief is often very helpful for kids who are struggling with anxiety, so that way they can know kind of what they did well, maybe what didn't go well, and what we're going to make different tomorrow. In my house, we do something called high-low buffalo. It's just, naming what your high of the day was, what your low of the day was, and then buffalo is just something interesting of your day. And so, so that's just another example of and so then I'm going to move now to daily check-ins. So morning check-ins and evening briefings are very helpful for those reasons I just described. But daily check-ins can also be really helpful. And I'm going to go to this slide real quickly. So a daily check-in is just checking in with your kids about how's it going? How are you doing right now? And a lot of times kids are going to tell you, I'm fine, or it's good, no worries, whatever. They're not going to give you a lot of information, but and also your kids aren't really going to probably tell you, you know, I'm feeling anxious right now, or they might not have the words to share with you, like I'm really worried about the future, you know, things like that. So the Carrie Dunbaron and Leah Cooper's, but Carrie Dunbaron is the first slide. It's the 5-point scale. If you're not familiar with her work, it's fabulous. A lot of our kids are linear thinkers, and so she has taken things that can be very abstract, like emotions, and made them into a 5-point scale. And so using a 5-point scale can be helpful in letting our children know kind of where we're at, but also they can let us know in very simple way where they're at. And so they might say, you know, I'm at a 4 right now. And so then you meet in at that point, and by the way, it's a lot easier to say I'm at a 4 than, you know, I'm really disappointed that I didn't get the grade that I wanted. I mean, it's a lot easier to give a number than it is to actually explain all. And it's fun when I do this with kids because they will sometimes say, like a 3.75. I use the zones a lot when I'm in my practice. A lot of schools use the zones because they're also very simple. Oops. To describe kind of what's going on for kiddos using colors. And so this is just another way that you can, if you're sensing your child is needing something, or even if you're not, it's also oftentimes to just say, you know, okay, after every hour, I'm going to just do a check-in with my kiddo and see how they're doing. So that's what that's about. The next thing after daily check-ins is something called calming menu. So this is an example of a calming menu. And a child isn't going to always be very good at, well, some children are very verbal, so, but they might not always be able to tell you in the moment what's going on. But if you're staying regulated and you really are in tune with them, you might be more apt to be able to say, you know what, I'm noticing that this is going on. Maybe we need to take a break. But the calming menu is something that you would do well in advance with your child. And sometimes it's hard to come up with things that might be helpful in calming. If you know something that's helpful and calming to you, you can certainly share it with your child and put it on the list. This is just an example of what a calming menu might look like, and it gives a lot of good ideas for things that your child could just circle and say, you know what, I'm going to try that. Calm myself down when I'm getting really frustrated. So calming menu is something I highly recommend just to have for yourself, but also for your child. So calming menu is helpful for when we're experiencing these types of emotions and unknown. It's just nice to know. And if we do it well in advance, then it can make a bigger difference. The next thing I have on here for the structure piece is choosing healthy foods and snacks that support emotion regulation. We are headed into flu season. We're already dealing in a pandemic. There is some research to show certain ingredients in foods really do pull our immune system down and can really hype us up as well. So thinking in advance about just simple things like food There's an acronym in the motion regulation world. It's called HALT. It's HALT. HALT stands for, are you hungry? Are you anxious? Are you lonely? Or are you tired? But the first one is, are you hungry? So when we're talking about regulation and anxiety, we actually do need to make sure that we are making sure our kids' basic needs of food and diet are being met. So having healthy foods and snacks at the ready is another thing that can be helpful with anxiety. So the last thing on this list that I thought would be good to kind of mention is a lot of our kids are spending a lot of time, we are spending a lot of time on computer, on a device for learning, but also even our kiddos in face-to-face, they're also dealing with those, with a lot of computer time. And so the last one on here is consider posture while online learning. And I have this picture here. This is from Jamie Chavez, the Center for Connection. She's an occupational therapist. And she highlights in this picture, you may have noticed, I don't know, your kid's getting more headaches or body aches. But this is something very simple. You can see the red arrows indicating that the student's down at the desk to see the laptop, resulting in his neck going forward. And that's going to cause strain, not only to his neck, but also to the shoulders and back. And it also makes the eyes work harder. And so it makes it more difficult to pay attention if that part of your neck, the vestibular nuclei on your neck, on the back of your neck isn't activated. And so we need you to be a little bit more looking straight. And so looking down all day or down towards a laptop isn't really helpful. And so what she suggests is that you just elevate your screen by using some books or any other type of that would boost it up. So then you're looking more at eye level and your back isn't have that strain. The other thing is you'll notice the kiddos' feet are flat on the ground. And so that also helps with that posture and will give more positive influence in the posture. If your kiddo doesn't have a chair that their feet touches the ground for or on, just considering kind of putting something like a stool so that their feet or box so that their feet can be planted on the so those are just some simple, things that I thought would probably be a real game changer. And again, your body and that you're having to learning in school. So I wanted to just highlight a little bit more about the things that are actually helpful for kiddos. And this is probably going to be the more technical slide, and there's a lot of words on here, so just stay with me. But we know in the research that to stay motivated when learning at home, students need to feel a few things. So our kids need to feel these things, and if we're trying to really provide them with the best that we can, it's important to know what we need, right? So they certainly need to feel competent. They need to feel a sense of belonging or connection with other people, and they need autonomy. So competence is like not necessarily about getting 100s or getting all A's. It's more about focusing on what we would call effort or improvement. So really helping them to feel competent and accomplished in things in terms of moving towards something. So if yesterday wasn't so good in how they managed emotions or how they did in social studies, really just focusing on that they're improving in that, really aiming for them, yes, this is 2020, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but look how far you've come, look what you've already created, and look at the skills you've mastered in doing, A, B, and C. So really helping them to feel competent in the things that that they really, the skills that they already have, but the ones that they're working on, really focusing on the improvement in that, not necessarily the relatedness piece. So really just when you're there with them, and this is hard, especially as parents, we want to naturally just fix things for our kids, but really sometimes they just, like we all do, they just want to be seen and understood. So really listening and empathically and providing that emotional support, you know, reminding them that they can do hard things, that that they have you to support them, really giving that connection with you. But also another piece is helping them to feel connected with anybody that might be in the class or anybody that might be in the neighborhood. And right now it's really difficult to do some of that, but trying to get creative with helping them feel connected to their teachers or to their peers. And that might mean we have to go back to like snail mail and things like that, or texting a friend or something like that. But really helping them feel connected with you, if they can't at least feel connected with other people in their community right now. And then going to autonomy, providing meaningful choices and allowing them to incorporate their personal interest in what it is that they're having to do all day long. So, so that's just one of those things that giving them, you probably are very aware of, like when we can let children have a choice in what it is they're going to be learning or how they're going to be learning, or they get to incorporate something that they're interested in. If PE has to include, you know, a physical activity, let it be one of their choice, let it be something. So that gives them a sense of autonomy over what it is that they're learning and what it is. The next bullet is feeling connected to a teacher can also make a big difference in educational outcomes. So, so this is something that I really feel strongly about. So actually my son's teacher sent a postcard to him after they started virtual learning. And I thought that that was just really, really sweet of her to, so that she was, and it showed that she was trying to build that connection with him. And of course my son knows that probably the whole class got one, but it was really important that, especially to me as a mom, that this teacher was trying to be connected to my son, and because that makes a big difference and in our learning. And right now, that's the big piece that we're missing by not being able to be in school with our teachers. And so anything that you can do to help make them feel connected and help the teacher to feel connected to your child can help with their educational outcomes. And so just real quickly, one of the ways that we can do that is by, you know, reaching out to our teachers and letting them know kind of where our child has been. You may already do this. I've recommended this for years to parents, especially for parents with children who have special needs, to give kind of like the quick and dirty version of like who your kiddo is and what their strengths are and maybe what they struggle with. But especially now, since the pandemic has started, it can be nice to give your teacher a back to school. Did anybody get sick in your child's family? Did anything major happen? Did you lose your job? You know, it might be helpful to kind of give your teacher some insight. And then also the second picture is getting to know y'all. This is what I send to my son's teachers every year. I've done it since he was in daycare, because I know that that connection with the teacher or educator is so important. And I am, when I'm giving and thinking about them, I'm wanting to make sure that I'm actually going to be getting them things or sending them things or messages that they might actually want or that they might actually be interested in. So I send this every year to my kids' teacher, asking them about them. And so I think that that can go a long way, especially right now, and it's certainly something we can control and feel good about doing, and helping our child have a good school. And I think the final thing that I'm going to talk about here is time and nature. So it's the last bullet point. It says time and nature can improve our mental health and children. This is something that is really, really important. I talked a little bit about getting outside earlier, but we actually know now that nature can really buffer the effects of loneliness and social isolation, which right now we're we're feeling very socially isolated. So if we can even just get outside for anywhere from like 2 to 15 minutes a day and be in nature, it doesn't have to be a mile long hike at one of the trails. It can literally just be in your backyard, spending some time outside. And I know it's hot, but if you can get creative with that, it can actually be a game changer, and for your children, and obviously for yourself. It can actually improve their attention and focus if they spend time outside. So I highly recommend that parents, if they're getting, even my teenagers who get 10 minutes in between classes, right now, I'm recommending that they just step outside and be outside for a few minutes, and come back inside. And so that's something that we actually know in the research to be something that so again, bottom line, I just want to go through here is, trust yourself to be able to do hard things. We can do hard things. You as parents of children with special needs can definitely do hard things. So that's what's important, especially right now when we're in this time of, and then things work until they do not. So don't be afraid to pivot and make a change. Just because you started out with this daily schedule that came from, this website or proven to work, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Every family is going to be different. And so if you start out trying something and it works good for a couple of days, but then it doesn't, don't be afraid to pivot and make a change. This year is like no other, and we are not alone. So we feel socially isolated, but it's really important to know that we're all in this together, and it's important to reach out, and there are lots of people. And then the final thing is self-care is not an option when we're talking about supporting our children. I have some helpful links that are out there. The first one I have out here is actually pandemicparenting.org. This is a great site that actually takes the research of psychology, and it's incorporating, it's all very new, what we're dealing with, but it's taking kind of what we know about ourselves and kind of incorporating it to helping you have some helpful strategies. The Center for Connection is where Ina Bryson works, and she's the co-author or the Whole Brain Child, and a lot of wonderful books that can be helpful for children. And then these Making Social Learning Stick, Tilt Parenting, Understood.org, and Zones of Regulation. These are sites that I took from in the slides that have some very concrete things that you can be using with your child to be helpful. So these are things that there's a lot of research out there, and there's a lot of knowledge out there and resources, but these are some of my favorites. I think that's all I have for today. So yeah, I would welcome any questions. I know we're over the noon hour, so I apologize for that. But if anybody would like to ask, I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. It's a wealth of information, and I know just looking at just the resources and things that you provided, I'm sure one of the questions and follow-up questions that I'll receive for people that will watch this later are going to be, can we have a copy of the slides? Because there's great content there, checklists and everything. So if that's something you can share with me, and then I can share with parents as I ask for it as well.
Absolutely.
Get those resources to them. So here's some of my takeaways. So for those who are still with us, please put your questions in the chat box. And in the meantime, I will also kind of put what some of my takeaways were. And I think it was, I have so many. So I loved just being empowered, that it's okay to be empowered to trust yourself. And then focus on managing the things that I can control, and don't focus on what you can't, right?
Absolutely.
So I also really liked when you said choosing the information that you receive, because I do, especially right now, I just feel like we're so bombarded.
So much. It's so much information. And as mothers, as parents, we already have a huge cognitive load. We already have that. And so and we can only hold, about 9 bits of information in our mind at a time. So to be adding so much more is only going to be derailing us.
Right, right. So one of the things, I also like the high-low buffalo. I'm going to do that now. I never heard of that before. High-low, because it's so simple, because usually, especially I have teenagers, so the last thing they want is a long drawn-out conversation with mom.
Exactly. So it is just, and it's something that once they know, well, we're going to do this, and they could be thinking about it during the day and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's very simple, and you actually feel like you made a connection.
Yes, and that's why I think it's so important, is because it needs to be succinct and quick, because so the kids feel like, okay, it's not going to be like a half-hour lecture or anything.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I was curious, do you have any favorite sensory soothing tools or things that you really like or use, or you've seen as
Yeah. Well, I think obviously all of our sensory needs are different, but one of my favorites is Aaron's Thinking Buddy. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's one of my favorites. I have the thing that the kids like in my office the best is I'm blanking on the word now, but it's a Hoverman sphere. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so these come in all shapes and sizes, but they're hard, but they're also just fun to focus on and to play with. And like I said, they come in all shapes and sizes. And so there's movement involved, and so that's something that lots of kids like to play with and touch. I know the I don't know what they're called, but they're like bubbles that feel like water or I'm blanking on the word. I'll have to look it up. But kinetic sand is the other thing that is a favorite for that. And really and truly, it depends on your what you like to touch and what you like to smell or what you like to feel in those moments. But those are the ones that come to mind. I apologize. They're like water bubbles that you can. But I don't know the name of them, and I don't have them in my office because they can get very messy. But yeah, so but they're very similar to kinetic sand.
Gotcha. Well, that and just going back to another one of the tools that you recommended, very simple. I mean, never occurred to me, but like the five senses, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, just connecting and observing what's going around you with your senses and kind of having that
Yeah,
calm you.
absolutely.
Even if you don't have a tool available to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very good to get practicing that. We don't recognize it. And so I like one of my self-care things is taking a walk on Saturday mornings. And so I've started doing that 5 senses while I'm on my walk. So it's just practicing. I think it's one of those things where we need practice in even when we're not upset, so that we can call upon that skill when we are upset.
We do have some comments. Excellent presentation.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time there. So people are really appreciating the your time and your expertise. So thank you.
Good. I'm so glad.
So one more I thought of was just you mentioned foods, of course, because food is kind of like medicine, right? So some of the most common ones that maybe you would see that people maybe would tend to maybe need to avoid or or recommended for increasing in their diet. I mean, you touched on hydration, of course, needing plenty of water.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all know that foods high in sugar or carbs are going to be what our kids are going to seek, but that is probably one of the worst things that they can be having. I'm not against treats, but that's certainly one of those foods that we would call a woe food. We would want to say woe to instead of go. And so so we want to make sure that our foods that are high in sugar and starch are going to be limited. And then, vegetables, of course, are going to give you more energy. Proteins are going to give you more energy, those kind of things. But yeah, I think that's pretty much, yeah. And staying hydrated absolutely is important, because I think our kids don't get enough water in general. And so it's important to stay.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Johnson, thank you again for your time and these tips. And we'll go ahead and sign off for now, but thank you again.
You're so welcome anytime. And yeah, if there's anything, I will send you the slides. If anything else comes up, please let me know.
Great. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.